If civilization collapsed tomorrow, would you remember how to build a water wheel? Would you remember? Like I ever knew it in the first place. Today's sponsor, Hungry Minds. Or like a pencil? Well, no, you wouldn't. But today, the book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding Civilization, is exactly what it sounds like. It is a beautifully illustrated, look at this, 400-page, look how thick that is, encyclopedia packed with human innovation. And I want to prove to you just how every page is awesome. I shall open it up at a random page. There will be a random page, this one. Let's go this one. Beautifully illustrated, every page. I don't even know what it is. Oh, is that the water wheel? What are the odds? No, that is a generator. What about this one? What is that? Is that a train? Oh no, it's an awesome coil gun. I haven't come across this one before. Is that like a... Not what we're doing right now. This is ancient innovations to modern breakthroughs laid out across 180 topics with engineering-style drawings mixed with medieval art. It's not a textbook. It's something between a survival guide and the most interesting coffee table book you'll ever own. I'm genuinely thinking about buying another one. They obviously sent me this one for free. I've actually bought these for people, which I suppose I don't have to do because they sponsor me. But it's just easier sometimes. I'm thinking about getting another one for home because I was showing this to my kids who don't understand what's going on, but it's got these really nice pictures. And compared to like reading Peppa Pig or something, it's entertaining for me as well. And I have to have this at work because I have to talk about it, but I want one for home. Hungry Minds, can you send me another one? Sorry, this is supposed to be an ad. This thing blew up on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, raised $3.2 million. The binding, the paper, the quality, the cover design, it's all fantastic. It's the perfect gift for a curious friend, your dad, or just to keep in your end-of-the-world bunker, which you definitely have. Use code INTOTHESHADOWS10 and hit the link in the description below to go grab a copy. Thank you so much. And now today's episode. It was Boxing Day, December the 26th, 2004, a bright Sunday morning in Sri Lanka. The world just celebrated Christmas, and all across the globe, families were going on with the celebration. In Sri Lanka, that meant visiting the market, exploring the shores, and for some, traveling aboard the Matara Express. On this fateful day, disaster struck the shores of Sri Lanka in the form of a massive tsunami. 2 waves, and the Matara Express was no more, a fate no one would have predicted when boarding the train. When it left the station, train number 50 had about 1,700 passengers. After the earthquake struck the seabed, almost everybody aboard train number 50 lost their lives in the largest rail disaster by death toll in history. What came next was a much larger disaster, a series of waves pacing across the Indian Ocean at an unprecedented scale and speed. Some waves were taller than palm trees or even buildings by the time they crashed into the shorelines. Aboard the Matara Express, passengers had no idea what was headed their way. By the time their train would have arrived, it was already gone, leaving dead bodies in what became the deadliest train wreck in living memory. Now, before we explore train number 50's fateful journey, let's start from where it all began, deep in the blue waters of the Indian Ocean. The December 26, 2004 earthquake was unlike anything the modern world had ever witnessed. The earthquake struck right at the seabed, and what resulted was more than an ordinary shaking of the ground. The quake had a magnitude somewhere between 9.1 and 9.3, which ruptured along 1,200 kilometers of seafloor. That kind of force can collapse tall buildings, destroy property, and trigger landslides. Rupture occurred at the boundary between the Indo-Australian plate and the Eurasian plate, releasing immense energy into the waters. Within minutes, entire villages in Sumatra were destroyed, making up over 100,000 fatalities on that Indonesian island alone. But in Sri Lanka, the quake itself wasn't the real killer. In the open ocean, tsunami waves carrying incredible energy passed by unnoticed. They started slow, they gained momentum, and they gained strength as they approached the shore. Within minutes, they grew taller, turning into 30-meter walls of water. They struck everything along their path, spreading to the shores of Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, India, the Maldives, and even Somalia. Unfortunately for the Matara Express, its fate was sealed. Its rail tracks were in the direct path of the strike. In a matter of 2 hours after the first tremors in Sumatra, colossal waves would hit Sri Lankan coastal villages. The disaster was made even worse due to the lack of a warning system. For those who knew what to look for, the strange behavior of animals and roaring sounds of oncoming water said it all, but most people neither suspected what was happening nor heeded the warning signs. Families continued to enjoy their day at the beach, basking in the midday sun, swimming, and losing themselves in the view of the clean blue waters. Fishermen prepared their nets after the night's escapades, and travelers were determined to make it inside the Matara Express, unaware of the charging waves. In the early morning of December the 26th, the Matara Express left the Sri Lankan capital city of Colombo for Galle and Matara. This route follows the coastal line, providing a picturesque journey with palm tree-lined beaches on one side and a lush countryside on the other. Fun side note, I've done this journey. Known for its scenic beauty, this line was popular among locals and travelers. On this particular day, it was filled beyond safe capacity. Vendors, laborers, school children, and holiday travelers squeezed into the carriages. Again, can also verify that those trains are busy. Some leaned out of the windows to catch the breeze and enjoy the sea view. Others held onto their parcels wrapped in bright paper, returning from Christmas festivities. The train's body rumbled steadily as its wheels clattered on the rails. It moved slowly, gradually heading into the epicenter of devastation. What was to be another routine trip turned out to be the last ride for most of the passengers. At around 9:30 a.m., a tsunami struck Sri Lanka's eastern coast, flattening homes and sweeping villages out to sea. Batticaloa and Trincomalee towns were hit hard. Nearly all homes along the coast were uprooted and swept into the sea. Been to both of those places. The west and south coasts were still calm. No sirens or warnings were issued, and no signs of the wall of water racing toward the shore. Life went on as usual, until it was too late. By 11 a.m., the tsunami was bearing down on the southwestern coast, the area around Galle and Matara. A few hundred meters away from the shore was Paralia, a small village where the Matara Express had stopped as part of its normal schedule. The train sat idle behind palm trees on the open shores, passengers resting in the midday sun as they enjoyed the serene beauty of the ocean. Out of the blue, the soft blowing wind intensified, and then came the roaring sound of massive waves approaching the shore. As survivors would later recall, it was a low, roaring rumble, more like thunder rolling across the sky. Birds scattered, dogs barked and howled moments before people saw the massive wave. A wall of water rising from the sea, charging forward at impossible speed. And then the first wave struck. This first wave surged inland, flooding the rice paddies, sweeping away homes along the shorelines and swallowing the train's tracks. Villagers who'd witnessed the tsunami hit the coastal village of Paralia thought it was as if the earth was breaking itself apart, and surviving passengers from the Matara Express would later describe it as, quote, ocean coming to life and swallowing the earth. During a near-death experience, every person's going to fight for a survival. Passengers screamed in fear and disbelief as water burst through the open doors and windows, sweeping away belongings and dragging people off their feet. From inside the train, some passengers climbed onto the roof and others broke out of the windows to escape. Fortunately, the train was built from heavy steel. It was firmly grounded to its rail bed. Only a few carriages were lifted off the track. None of them were toppled. Fearing for their lives, villagers clung to palm trees and started shouting for the train to be moved, but nothing happened. The Matara Express stood still. The train was stranded as the tracks were underwater. Communication with other train stations was already off, so the driver couldn't move forward or retreat. The train was just a sitting target, its carriages jammed with people who could only hope for the best. For a brief moment, it looked like most of the passengers might endure the strike. The water level receded slightly, leaving the train upright, though battered. Some passengers and villagers cheered in relief, believing they had survived the worst of it. But the deadliest part of the tsunami was not that first wave. It was the second wave, and it was coming very fast. Villagers and passengers were still grappling with what had happened after the first wave when an even deadlier wall of water towered over the palm trees. This time, it was filled with all the floating debris and destruction of the first wave, and it was huge. It blotted out the horizon and left no time for anyone to retreat. Boats, shattered buildings, and all the debris carried by tons of water crashed at the shoreline, lifting all 12 carriages of Matara Express like toy blocks. No amount of metal or grounding could protect the train from the second wave. It was smashed, flipped, and rolled over together with the rest of the wreckage. Carriages filled with passengers were ripped open and flooded, drowning entire families instantaneously. The doors and windows were pressed by the currents and could no longer open. Those who were outside were swept away and dragged into the trees. The sound of screaming people blended with the screeching metal and the crashing debris. Those trapped inside, they had no room for escape, and within seconds, their struggle was over. They succumbed to the water. As one survivor would later recall, it was like the train became a coffin. Water came from all directions. We were trapped inside. Within minutes, the second wave had turned the Matara Express into a twisted heap of discarded steel and left entire villages flooded. Passengers were either dead or fighting for their lives. As the water receded, the scene left behind was that of Sri Lanka's worst nightmare. Nearly 1,700 passengers lost their lives, more than 100 were injured, and those who survived were left in shock or mourning their losses. Families never reunited, children orphaned. Sri Lanka had just witnessed the deadliest train disaster in history. Scenes of desperation and loss awaited the receding water. Hundreds of bodies lay lifeless across the fields as mothers searched for their children and children wailed for their parents. The Matara Express train was unrecognizable. 11 of its 12 carriages flipped and crashed, some still holding trapped passengers inside. Villagers were desperately trying to pull people from the flooded carriages while navigating a scene now filled with dangerous shards and debris. Local accounts describe families clinging together as the water tore them apart. One survivor recalled managing to escape narrowly by breaking a window after the water pinned him against the roof of the carriage. Others remember grabbing tree branches, only to lose their grip and be carried away. The scenes that followed were choked with grief. Parents holding their lifeless children, couples separated forever, and rescue efforts rendered impossible. Roads were destroyed and communications cut down. There was no time to spare. The villagers who survived tried to rescue people, pulling them out with their bare hands, but the dead bodies were just too many. The air was filled with stench of fuel, brine, and death. By nightfall, it was obvious that the Matara Express had become the deadliest rail disaster in history. Over 1,700 people lost their lives, entire families erased in an instant. News of the disaster quickly spread across Sri Lanka as reports of the tsunami's devastation came in from numerous districts. The waves had struck the island's entire coastline, destroying fishing villages and turning hotels and resorts into ruins. Roughly 35,000 Sri Lankans lost their lives, and more than 500,000 were left homeless. However, the destruction of train number 50 was unmatched. In national newspapers, it was called the Train of Death, a steel coffin that had become the most brutal epicenter of the island's destruction. In part, it was the photographs of the Train of Death circulating around the globe that gave the world its first inklings of the scale of the devastation. Sri Lanka's national railway system was immediately paralyzed. The roads were practically useless. This meant rescue efforts were derailed and chaotic. The Sri Lankan Navy deployed sailors to help volunteers search for the bodies. Hospitals overflowed with the injured, and gathering points were established in schools and temples to serve as temporary morgues. In the days that followed, families walked from village to village searching for their missing loved ones. Mass graves were dug to bury the victims. In some heartbreaking cases, some lineages ended, entire families being wiped out, leaving no one behind to mourn the loss. The scale of the grief was unimaginable. The affected villages were completely torn apart beyond comprehension. Yet for Sri Lankans, the grief became anger. People wondered why so many lives were lost without warning, and why the train wasn't stopped even after knowing the ocean was behaving strangely hours before. The Sri Lanka tsunami train disaster was not just a matter of bad luck, but more a case of an unprepared world. Japan and the Pacific region had long had warning systems established because of the rampant tsunamis that happen in the area. However, the Indian Ocean has always been calm west of Indonesia, and no case of a tsunami had ever been reported before that day. No Indian Ocean tsunami early warning system was available at the time of the disaster. Scientists in Hawaii were aware of the earthquake in their readings just minutes after the initial tremors took place, but they had not developed the coordinated communication network necessary to issue an alert. Adding to the misfortune was the lack of local education on the signs of a coming wave, as people missed the natural warnings. That strange behavior of animals, the faint roaring sound in the distance. Villagers had seen the sea receding unusually before the wave struck, which is a classic sign of a tsunami. However, only a few interpreted what it meant, and even then, there was little time to react. Some rushed to the exposed seabed to catch fish, completely unaware they had only minutes before the oncoming Indian Ocean made its resurgence. Worse, the tracks of the Matara Express ran dangerously close to the ocean's edge. Engineers constructed the tracks with no consideration for how catastrophic tsunamis could be. There had never been a tsunami before. The train's driver deserved none of the blame. He was in the dark because of the wider communication breakdown, so no one had any idea of the danger that was ahead. Beyond the train wreck, Sri Lanka's suffering was part of a much larger catastrophe that struck the Indian Ocean. The train disaster recorded over 1,000 deaths. The 2004 tsunami, that hit 14 countries and claimed over 230,000 lives. In Thailand, tourists were swept off beaches. In India, fishing villages were torn apart. In Somalia, thousands of miles from the earthquake's epicenter, entire communities were destroyed. However, in Sri Lanka, the train became an emblem of the day's horror. Survivors of the disaster have told their stories over and over in the years since the catastrophe. For them, the memory is both painful and important. Some recall the sound of the waves and the sight of the towering walls of water. Others are reduced to tears when they remember the silence that followed the disaster. Parents remember children being separated from their grip by the force of the currents. Children speak of losing entire families within seconds. These stories have kept the tragedy alive and made the grim reality impossible to ignore. Behind every number is a human, a person with dreams, plans, and loved ones, waiting for their return. The tsunami changed Sri Lanka in terms of disaster preparedness. An Indian Ocean tsunami warning system was finally established in 2005, linking 28 countries with seismic monitoring stations and communication networks. Advocacy groups also organized education campaigns and outreach programs to help people learn about tsunamis and their signs. Advancements in communication technologies have also made it possible to circumvent previous hurdles. Scientists, governments, and the public all collaborate to increase information dissemination about such events. The scars of the tsunami, they're still fresh for survivors, even though the disaster happened over 2 decades ago. Villages like Paralia are no longer on the map. Memorials have been built near the wreck site where rusted pieces of the Matara Express still stand today as a reminder. Tourists visit to pay their respects, and survivors often return to remember loved ones. The wreckage has become a monument and a warning, a reminder of fragility and how quickly our lives can be undone by nature's powerful forces. Each anniversary features ceremonies in Paralia, with locals lighting candles and offering flowers in memory of those whose lives were lost. Sri Lanka's rebuilt the infrastructure, but the memory will be forever a part of its history. For many, the events of December 26th remain a constant reminder of the importance of awareness and preparedness in the face of unexpected disaster.